I'm Joshua Starkweather. My pronouns are he, him, and I want to welcome you to the Glamazon Campfire. So this episode is about growing up gay. I myself am a gay man, and I'm here with my lovely guest Maverick, who also identifies as a gay man, and also uses he, they pronouns, I believe?
Yeah, so I see myself as non-binary, so I do both. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, so why don't you introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, so I'm Maverick. I work in the Amazon Books team, so I look after our business that helps like print books on demand for publishers and authors. And my pronouns are he, they.
Nice. Does your job involve any kind of publishing in the traditional sense, or is it primarily print on demand?
It's a bit of both. So I have some vendor clients. I help them kind of be able to print their own books on demand, and then we also have like authors who want to publish their own book on their own.
Yeah, I ask you because like as a aspiring author who wishes they were an author, I'm always like, I could just print my own book and it would be famous one day, right?
Yeah, you can absolutely do it. It's just got to come up with an idea and you can do it.
That's how that works, right? Yeah. No. So I invited you here on the show because one of the things that we haven't talked a lot about, surprisingly, in the many episodes that we've recorded so far is what it's like to grow up gay. And I became aware from our producer, Amanda, that you have a really interesting story to tell about that. So if you don't mind, I'd love for you to kind of just like talk to me about where you're from, like what was early childhood like for you, and we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah, cool. So I grew up in Canberra. People obviously know that's a capital city here, but I grew up in a very like religious environment. So my parents, big churches, Pentecostal Christians. So think speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, everything from that kind of sense. Yeah. And it felt like it was an environment that's very full on all the time, very invested in their faith and what they believed. And I mean, there's lots of really good things to growing up in that kind of environment. You've got a big community around you at that time. But as I grew up and knew more of who I saw myself as, and knew that I was gay, there's a lot of that conflict and tension internally of, how do I fit within this? Like, how can I be this in an environment that says this is not okay?
Yeah. I was really excited to invite you onto the show after Amanda gave me a little bit of a idea of like kind of your background, because I actually grew up obviously in the United States, but I was raised in a very evangelical kind of super church. Yeah. There, our standard services would have 2,000 people, and I guess I'm very lucky in the sense that there was a bit of a diversity of political views at the church. I mean, it was all basically moderate to right wing, but like my parents were definitely of the more moderate kind of stance around things. But one of the things that I really wanted to discuss with you was this kind of idea of, as we're growing up, we are discovering ourselves, right? Yeah. And a lot of times, and this has come up in other episodes as well, we don't necessarily have the language to express ourselves or to figure out what this thing that I'm experiencing means or is. Yeah. And having that language can be so powerful. And one of the things that I feel like I didn't get exposure to as somebody who grew up in a church with parents who were very, active in the church and kind of limited most of my activities to church-related activities. I didn't get exposure to the LGBT community. My exposure was limited to TV news during the AIDS crisis and, schoolyard taunts saying that, AIDS is caused by people having sex with monkeys and, gays are perverts and gays are lots of negative associations, right? Yeah. And so like the idea that I was gay never really occurred to me, even though like I can tell you right now from like a very, very young age.
You liked guys.
Yeah. I was chasing little boys around the schoolyard the way little girls would chase other boys around the schoolyard. And, I didn't know what that meant or why I was doing it. It was just like...
just what you're doing.
What I was doing. Yeah. Right? I didn't need to explain it because at the time it was just what came natural, right? Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like I think that idea of not knowing how to label it, how to think about it, particularly when you've been given lots of labels and descriptors by the people you're around and by that religious environment, your whole idea of what that is one worldview and one point of view. And when you start to think about, okay, maybe that's who I like, and it's like, well, how am I that, right? Do I want to be that? Am I a pervert? Is what I'm feeling, and is what I'm wanting to experience wrong? So you kind of hide away from it, which puts you into a spiral of not really searching to understand that or exposing yourself to it, because you don't want to be that, because you're told it's wrong and told it's bad.
You start to avoid looking, right?
Yeah, because if you're not looking at it, you're not doing the wrong thing, right? You want to be a good little Christian boy, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And yet, I feel like, at least in my experience, like my authentic self was leaking out for everyone to see and attracted attention. And, I think I was like lucky, in air quotes, in the sense that like there was a diversity of perspectives within the church about, how bad was it to be a homosexual, ranging all the way from, well,
fire and brimstone.
You're going straight in the bin to hell, to, well, we don't like it when people get remarried, but there's divorced people who have remarried and they love Christ and they can be redeemed. And it's like the whole love the sinner, hate the sin kind of thing.
Yeah, it's this concept of, can you fix it, right?
Yeah. And as long as you're like not actively gay, like as long as you don't act on it, then totally fine with that, and not realizing that they've literally just like hand waved away like 50% of the human experience is like falling in love, getting married, making a family.
Which means you can't do that authentically anymore. And so,
it's off the table, but don't worry. Like
you can still have a life, just has to be this.
Be alive and go to church. And I always felt like that was just one of those, it has this lovely drapery of softness, of non-hate. And yet, even from a very young age, like I knew what was behind that drapery. Right.
Yeah.
And it didn't make me feel any better. Right. Like it was like almost in a way more dangerous to my conception of myself, because it was like, oh, well, then I can control this. I can avoid it. I can suppress who I am and I'll be okay.
Yeah, rather than outright hate or anger that might make you resent it and move it against it, right?
Yeah.
Like it kind of almost entices you into go. It's actually almost this thing of, it makes you want to prove that you can be good to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, if they were outright mean to you, you go, oh, I don't want to be like you. It distances you. But as soon as there's kind of this niceness of it, it's, well, can I be that? Can I prove myself there? And I think like there's definitely one experience I remember. We were doing this. I don't know if you in your church had anything like this, like men's purity programs and being sexually pure and all these type of things, and like they had this kind of like discussion after one of these nights, and I remember going getting to the point where they finally got to the part of the course which kind of was going to brush over the idea of gayness or whatever, and it's kind of like floated by the guy running it, and then one of the guys that's a couple of years older than me at the time basically like pipes up and goes, all right, if there's anyone here that is, I would have bashed them. And I just basically remember like sitting back in my seat, almost trying to like make my behavior, my movements more masculine at the time, not wanting to like,
you're like square your shoulders, stand up straight, puff out your chest,
not look like Tim, that I could be anything like that, because clearly what they're telling me about all this acceptance is not really how they feel.
Yeah, that's wild. And do you remember, I know it was a long time ago, but do you remember in this moment, were there any adults present when that person said, I'm going to bash them? And did they say anything?
They did nothing. They just did this kind of almost like laughing it off thing, as if it's funny.
Don't do that. It's a violence.
Yeah, you shouldn't be mean to people. It was not like any kind of like actual, assessment of, because at some level, I don't think they think it is wrong to think that. It's, they might not do it physically, but they think there's something that should be fought against, right?
Yeah. Was the messaging that you were getting kind of similar to mine in the sense that like there was a diversity, or was it literally like, no, fire and brimstone all the way?
I think it was all in at least my church anyway, all that it was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but there was definitely a difference in how people approached it, is whether they wanted to fix it or whether they thought you couldn't be fixed.
Right. But no matter what, you were broken.
Yeah, no matter what, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah. And there's nothing you did to do this, but you're still broken. What a lovely message to tell a child.
Yeah. There's nothing. There's no way you can fix your life. You're done with.
You're just broken.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got dealt, a bad card. At least people would pity you if you had cancer or something like that. But no, like, you're just going to get bullied and be told that you're a sinner for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I think I eventually got to a point where I needed to be something different for myself. Like, I think I got to the point where I couldn't do that anymore, like in my late teens, and got to the point where I was able to tell my best mates at school that I thought I was bi at the time. That was kind of the way I was explaining it to myself. Classic kind of for a lot of us.
There's many such cases. Yeah, like it almost became. I almost feel like that's a big part of the root of biphobia in our current environment, is that it was a truck stop on the way
for lots of us. Yeah,
for a lot of us, because it was the closest thing to a safe thing that we could do. The idea of coming out of the closet all the way gay right from the start was unthinkable.
Well, because I think you still think that you've got some part of you that's normal then, right? Some part of you that fits the worldview, but also fits like being able to have a family, which is such a celebrated thing in a religious circle. And I think like it's definitely something in my own experience that I wish that I let myself think that I still could have a family. You know, as a gay man, right? And obviously there's lots of options now, but yeah.
But especially when you're younger and you don't have your own income, and you look at the numbers associated with like surrogacy, and it just seemed completely like
crazy.
I was like, I can't afford a Maserati, I can't afford a child,
let alone like a house in Sydney. But
right. But like, yeah, like I think there's a lot tied up together with all of this too. And one of the things that I mentioned to you wanting to talk about was sort of this whole idea of what are the adults in the room doing here, right? And there is authentically held beliefs, right? And people may believe things that we disagree with, and one of those things might be that same-sex attracted people are not what God is into, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's being like very gentle. Let's assume that that's a very authentically held belief. That doesn't mean that, if there's a gay man here, I'm going to bash him.
Yeah.
Is compatible with that belief. And yet I have the same experience. I was actually bullied quite extensively at church by a couple of people who were like obviously honed in on, whatever intangible aspects of myself were giving away the fact that I was same-sex attracted.
Did you have anyone that like you felt like you could go to at that
I told
point in
everyone.
time?
I told my mom. I told my teachers. I was like a little goody two shoes, like tattletale. I told everybody, and
did they do anything?
not really. Like, it got to the point where until there was like an actual violence. Like,
It was okay.
he hit me, and that was when that finally he got told to stop. But it wasn't because of what he was saying to me. It was because he was violent. Right. And it was not only that, but like he had isolated me from the rest of the people into like a larder, basically, off like the church kitchen, and had like hit me and threatened to kill me. And like that was when the adults in the room were like, oh, we have a problem here. And it was so wild to me, because even in that moment, it was like so clear to me that like the adults aren't going to protect me. Like, no one's going to protect me, was my feeling in that, right?
Yeah, I think it's this thing of like realizing that, I think for me it was very much realizing that adults were processing their own stuff as well, right? And like me coming out, my when my parents found out, their first response when they found out through the chain of kind of information was basically like yell and question at me. And then when I wanted to leave home and be away from it, and their first response was, well, should we pull you out of school then, and because we don't want to pay for that if you're not at home. And then so my parents' first response was, how do we like why should we pay for this, or how do we deal with our own issues of being uncomfortable talking about it, rather than actually checking that I was okay or that I was coming back.
And this is just when you would come out as bisexual to your friends and then family, or
Yeah, so I'd come out to my two mates, and then it was like a rumor mill, and like they still profess to this day that they never said anything to anyone, but they were talking about it, and someone overheard them, and it spread that way. However, it spread basically. My dad was board of the school. The principal, he'd hired the principal, was good mates with the principal. So when the principal heard it on the grapevine, he went and told my parents. So I didn't get it. I just didn't get the choice to bring it up in my own way to them, or figure out how I can make it palatable to them at the time, or even just to be able to say my own kind of piece for myself. I didn't get to tell my brothers and sisters. They all kind of heard it through the lens that those people had, rather than me actually getting to say, this is why I feel this way, or getting to have a conversation.
what a terrible thing to have taken from you. Like, I'm really sorry that happened.
Thank you.
As much as like I didn't come out to my family or basically anyone until I was 21, which is like the opposite side of the spectrum. I got so good at hiding it, that like I had constructed entire like habits and isms around trying to pretend that I was the straight
Hiding
guy.
your behavior.
Yeah.
It might look different.
Yeah, like practicing walking, like practicing standing, practicing everything so that I would avoid, the notice of bullies and family and anybody who might care, which is itself like really shitty. But at least I got to have my own coming out on my own terms.
Yeah, I guess it's something like I spent a lot of time angry. Like a lot of time feeling as if I didn't get what I deserved in a lot of parts of growing up. But in this, I almost feel like would I've done different things, even in my work life, or dreams I would have done as a young kid if I wasn't dealing with trying to pay my own living. And I think I got to a point where like the anger was useless. I wasn't getting anywhere with it, and it just made me more. It just made me more upset. But I think I've got to the point now where I've got a relationship with my parents now that I never really thought I'd have. So
I'm very glad to say the same. I think a lot of people aren't so lucky.
Yeah,
It still, for me at least, feels like there's a loss of intimacy, I guess is the word that I would say.
like surface level kind of connection.
Like it's not the deep connection I felt like I had with them prior to coming out, but like I remember, similar to when they had a plebiscite here in Australia to vote on whether or not gay marriage should be illegal. In my home state of Maryland, there was also a vote to legalize gay marriage or not. And I remember, begging my mom. I was like, "Look, I don't know if you can vote with a good conscience to pass gay marriage. Like,
Just don't vote against it.
just don't vote. Like, all I would ask is like, you just don't vote." And she couldn't even
like not take an action against you.
She couldn't say that she wouldn't. I don't know what she ultimately did, but I remember that being like one of the last moments of like, all right, my parents love me unconditionally. Like that question sort of, I was like, false.
Yeah.
And it was a terrible moment. And I've rebuilt the relationship up from, I think that was basically the bottom of the basement.
Yeah.
But it is like a really terrible feeling to realize that the people who, made you who you are. And a lot of times what was kind of crazy to me is like, I'd be having an argument with my mom and she'd be like, "I can't believe you think this way. Like, this isn't how I raised you." I'm like, I'm literally repeating things I know that you taught me because you taught me all these values and this is how I'm expressing them. So it was crazy, but yeah, I'm curious to hear kind of your journey as well about, coming out to your parents. It sounds like that didn't go so well. They heard it through the rumor.
Yeah.
And then I'm assuming things were a bit rocky for a while because they were talking about pulling you out of school and not paying for it.
Yeah, so I basically I knew it was coming a little bit because I'd had people on social media asking questions. So I knew that they're going to find out at some point.
Okay.
But I knew that I was either going to feel comfortable with being around them or I wasn't. And after they had basically spent that time, basically it wasn't it wasn't like any physical kind of threat, but it was just I felt very uncomfortable and very unsafe being me at home, and I felt like I was always going to have this kind of constant, constant abrasion with them all the time. I'm like, I don't want to be around that all the time. I can't do that. And so I kind of chatted with my mate that I was doing this musical with at the time, basically saying to him, hey, if shit hits the fan, sorry for my language, but
Sorry.
you know, that, you know, can you pick me up and kind of come stay with you for a bit? You know, can you clear it with your mum? And he cleared that up front before I kind of knew this conversation was about to happen with my parents. And so I left that night and didn't come back I didn't talk to them for about 6 months.
And this is when they confronted you, or?
So they confronted me. So I left the night they confronted me. It's about half an hour after they confronted me. And I basically packed up my stuff and got in his car and left.
Wow.
And that kind of, at 6 months was like, obviously there's parts of it were like quite free and getting to kind of like go to a gay club for the first time, and
right.
you know like experience kind of even nightlife, talking to boys I was interested in, that type, like being able to kind of be myself in that environment.
Yeah.
But that 6 months was also quite hard, and then I've, you know, met people who were the exact way that my parents had explained gay people. I remember, you know, probably my first real experience making out with a guy that you know I'd gone over there in quite innocent eyes of it to watch a movie and to hang out, and you know it was very kind of much enjoying the kissing and making out and all of that, and then I wanted to stop and he didn't. Yeah. And after leaving that, I remember kind of going home and going, I don't think I can do this either. Like, I can't be this person, because if a gay person can do that to me, then they are perverts. They are this, like,
yeah. Everything that I was told is true. What if that's me too?
Yeah, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be around that. So I think for me it was, and I think at that point too, I was still trying to kind of, growing up in a religious environment, I didn't not have, you know, religious experiences and spiritual experiences. So I was still kind of trying to understand how I felt about that and how I connected to that. So it was also very much like almost, you know, trying to talk to God about it at the time, trying to like pray this out and think about this out, and went, well, I don't want to be this, so I guess I should try and change it. So yeah, that's why I went back to my parents' place, basically saying that I thought I could change it, and I was planning to change it, just because I needed just to feel safe for a second.
And that was like, or when you say change it, was the idea just to be like, I'm going to be a celibate, good, non-practicing gay, or like had you been exposed to the ex-gay movement at this point yet?
Not immediately, but I started actually by like trying to look up stuff for myself because I wanted to change it, and then I spoke with the church that I was at, and I ended up, you know, getting this scholarship to study, you know, Bible school in Sydney, this big mega church called C3, but there was a pastor there that knew a pastor at Hillsong who he called himself an ex-gay. So I ended up meeting with him and basically having lots of chats, which like basically you can think of as a form of conversion therapy, but basically trying to talk it out, trying to do practices to change my like things that I don't even relate to my sexuality anymore, but like mannerisms or you know things that are more feminine because this mix up of gender and sexuality, but that became also like how to try to interrupt my thoughts when I thought about a guy and replacing it with women. It became quite strange in that like you think a church would also not want you to be around things like porn, right? But it was how do you replace the stimulus that you're having there to change that? It's a very kind of perverse and weird way to do that. But I spent about kind of a year and a half, 2 years chatting with this guy to try and change how I felt about it. And it kind of at one point almost like wheeled me out as a bit of a poster boy for it, which I had this kind of like deep uncomfortableness about.
I was going to say, how did you feel about that?
Yeah, I felt kind of this weird, like, it's two-way conflict of like, I want to be this, and I want to really, like, I want to impress them, I want to like make them think that I'm good with this, and I'm becoming this, and I also kind of this, what's that? I can't even think of the psychological word. It's like
Cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
kind of this thing of like, there's two things at the same time that are completely diverging, and there's people that they got me to talk to now about what, like, how I kind of come through things, that I now feel really like for a long time felt quite guilty about, about expanding that to other people and
Like leading others behind you along the same path.
Yeah.
Which you knew, I guess, was not as effective as it was being branded, and wasn't leaving you feeling as
fixed
as they might have led others to believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's more of this sort of like more examples of losing your sense of self, right? Like being told who you are, being used as a poster child, whether you want to or not, to sell something to someone else. Like I definitely see parallels of that, not just for things like gays in the church, but I feel like there was a big parallel for that. You were talking about like a men's purity group.
Yeah.
I remember in middle school, it was like, I want to say like 80+% of the other boys in my middle school Bible study like said that they were addicted to porn. And, that was like accepted as on face value. Like, yes, these poor innocent boys are addicted to porn. We will fix them. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like not having a conversation about healthy sexuality. It's not having a conversation about objectifying people's bodies and the commodification of sexual relationships. It's not about how to express love or when it's appropriate. It's like,
how to do that, any of that healthily, right?
no, it's all like, oh, you just need to like beat yourself up harder until you stop watching the porn.
It's the Catholic guilt kind of almost.
And it's like, okay, like looking back, I'm just like, these are untrained, not psychologists, not counselors, offering deeply harmful psychological advice, right? And, a lot of people just accept it and run with it. And then they'll use those people as the poster boys or girls to bring a whole nother wave of people along behind them and continue the cycle. What interests me as well about your story is, I don't hear, like you said, I think a couple times that you were really angry. I don't actually hear a lot of anger in the way you relate to this now.
Yeah.
So like what's changed? Like, were you angry at the time and now you've just kind of processed it and moved on and now you're not angry anymore? Or like, coming out of all of this, you're obviously sitting in front of me as a man who identifies as gay, or a non-binary person who identifies as gay. Where did the anger go? Like, I would be terribly angry at what had happened to me.
I think I have my moments still. Like, I don't get it perfect all the time by any means. I think I have to kind of almost manage myself around some types of people, and be really okay with going how much I'm going to let myself be in an environment with people that are unsafe for me. And sometimes that includes my parents, and knowing that, hey, I'm going to have 2 hours with them because I can keep the conversation away from anything that's going to push that kind of thing on them, which means like often I will not want to spend Christmas around them because it's a religious thing to them, and because it'll make me angry at the things that I've lost, that I can't get back, of time that I've lost that I can't get back. I find myself I'm quite a driven person, so the idea that I've wasted a lot of time that I could have had back.
And relationships that you've lost too, right? Like I think about that a lot. I'm very sad about the very close relationships I used to have with my sister and family, which are, in a state of repair, but they're like nowhere near what they used to be.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of invested time and emotional energy into those things. And it's not easy to just say, I have no control over this, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get angry and be like, what the hell? Like, you
Yeah.
could just change your mind. I didn't have that. I didn't have that ability. I didn't choose to be gay. I can't just change my mind about being gay. You can choose to not be approaching it from this direction, and yet you choose not to.
Yeah, it's this funny thing about how much we wish that people could be different to us. But I think there's some level of freedom of letting go of control of it, because the more you try and control it and make someone be what you want them to be or fill the hole that you need them to, the less they can. And I've had to I've definitely had to just focus on the good relationships. Like my brother, funnily enough, is also gay, so parents got the double whammy there. But I have a really good close relationship with him now. And there's a lot of things that I probably would have gone to a parent about that now I can go to my older brother about. So
he's older than you. That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think a common theme in our community is also when you lose access to people like parents or church leaders or things like that because of your identity, you're left without mentors. And I also talk a lot about the AIDS crisis robbed us of an entire generation of elder gay men who could have been our mentors, but just are dead,
Just
which
gone.
is crazy.
Yeah.
And you had your older brother. Were there other people in your life that you were able to find who kind of represented that role for you?
Look, I think I definitely resonate with that kind of relationships lost sense, because later down the line, I just lost all those connections I had with people from the church. I had someone who I thought was my best mate, whose wife, I used to look after their kids all the time, and his wife doesn't want me to be around them because of her own thoughts about what gay people are. And
Wow.
There's lots of that I feel like I've definitely lost, but I think I'm trying to place the right relationships in the right space, and I don't necessarily think I've got as many as I'd like. Yeah, it's definitely something I'd like to have more of.
You mentioned something about losing connections with all the friends that you had from your school. Your dad was the headmaster, or
he was the head of the board of the school, so he hired the headmaster,
chairman of the board of this school, which I assume was also parochial, religious.
Yeah, Anglican school.
And okay, yeah. And not gay affirming school.
Yeah, definitely not. Yeah.
Okay, because I know that there are some. There are some institutions that are not, that are associated with the church, but don't necessarily have as conservative views as the church they're associated. That's not the case. It was not a welcoming atmosphere for gay students.
Yeah, not at all. I think there's definitely, even beyond the kind of all the relationships I lost at school, it was very much after that, losing that church community that I built. And so I think for me, it's been trying to build a community out of the friends that I've got now. I've still got people in my life that play some kind of role like that. My grandmother, who was a pastor for 40-50 years, she has been nothing but supportive to me. So
isn't that so funny?
It's weird. I think that she, from an old generation, should be worse than my dad, but she I remember her sending him books about being gay and Christian. For her, that's the comforting part of, oh well, maybe he can be both. Yeah. For me, in my relationship with her, I don't have to subscribe to that to have that relationship with her. I think that's her hope for me, but it's not there's also not this pressure.
Yeah. She's more willing to just let you be who you are.
Yeah.
And accept that.
Yeah.
And then hope for whatever she wants to hope for. But I think that's the role of all parents, right? They have hopes and dreams for their kids, but ultimately it's your kid's job to decide what they want to do
and how they get there. And
yeah. The reason I was kind of touching on this whole parochial school idea is it was sort of the same situation for me growing up. I was actually homeschooled K through 12. So all the way through high school, I never set foot in a public school. And they have these things called co-ops, which are essentially like mini schools once a week, where you go in and all the other homeschool kids come and get their, weekly dose of social interactions, and all the moms and dads divide up and they teach the courses that they feel like they're most, able to teach.
Yeah.
Usually, you know, if they had a college degree in something like geography, they'll teach geography or something like that. And so actually, like in terms of education quality, I graduated with quite a good education in my view. But I was really resonating with your comment about losing your friends, because like obviously I was going to a co-op that was run by the church. My parents were homeschooling me with their friends who were from the church, and all their kids were all raised in the church. And so like I when I came out of in college, like it was basically like I don't think anybody in this entire group will talk to me anymore. I assume not. And then come to come to find out, that whole co-op was chakas with
gays.
queer kids.
Love it.
Gays, lesbians, non-binary people, like every identity under the sun. And I actually kind of like it's gotten to the point now that every time one of my parents mentions someone and I know that they're in our community, I just sort of like have a little bit of like a flutter in my heart. I'm like, you guys had no idea. We got through, like we managed to all grow up and become ourselves despite everything that you all tried to teach us.
Yeah, like there's definitely people from my school that I know now that are gay, but said nothing. Like said nothing at the time. We'd never know.
Yeah.
But found themselves later on.
And what a waste of time, right? Like all the other kids who are straight and cisgendered get to have their middle school like crushes and dances and heartbreaks.
Figure out what love is, and
yeah, and like they're not sitting around thinking about like, am I allowed to tell my parents that I have a crush on this boy? Like they're just having the crush on this boy. Like I can't have that crush on that boy. I have to think about it and censor myself. And even now, like there's so much of my life I just don't discuss with my parents because they're not going to get it.
Yeah. I think for like, I think for me with my parents has become this point of it's not even just the stuff that they don't get. It's this lack of trust from me for them. Because I guess so after I'd gone through the whole process of this therapy, kind of the last step in there, kind of, you know, for this process for them is, you know, go and date a girl. So I went and did that. You know, someone, you know, I got on with really well in the church, or like I really liked her as a person, and then grew to love her as a person. But to try to convince myself that, you know, maybe that, you know, the sexual feelings hadn't happened there yet because we, you know, we're not married, we're not supposed to, and when we do, well, that'll all kind of happen. Mm-hmm. So I went down that path and married her.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and you know, it was very much the wrong call. But I was trying to affirm who I was supposed to be. And I also wanted that ideal of a family for myself, and being able to have my own, because it felt like the only way of having all of this. But kind of as the relationship went on, like as you know, once we were married and you know, tried to, you know, go and have sex and all that type of thing, you know, didn't work the way it was supposed to,
right?
Because it was never supposed to, really, I guess. But you know, and that really soured the relationship for a while. And
well, she was aware of everything that you'd gone through.
Yeah.
And yet she was still like, oh.
I mean, I do, like, this is probably a bit conceited of me, but at some level I'm like, okay, I must have done some things right for her to love me, knowing all of that, right? Because, you know, I had been quite honest with her on the first date that, hey, you know, this is what I've put myself through, and I think this is, you know, this is who I want to be. There's definitely moments of her like wanting to confirm that was actually the case, and you know, there's definitely moments I, you know, maybe wish now that I checked myself a little bit more at the time, but you know, she knew coming in all of that, and it still kind of disintegrated pretty poorly, and so we had like increasing kind of levels of arguments for a long time, where, you know, at first it was just kind of her doing things to try and stimulate the sex life, then me avoiding it more, and then, you know, having these discussions with each other, her getting really upset and then getting more and more angry. And there's 3 or 4 times in about a period of 6 months where we'd have arguments and she'd backhand me across the face.
Whoa.
And the first time it happened was actually like there was a group of people there. No one said anything. Everyone was just awkward. And then about 20 seconds of silence, and everyone went on talking. And for me, it was just this kind of, again, this realization of no one coming to intervene.
Yeah.
But also just, again, this is another relationship that I'm not good enough for.
Mm-hmm.
Another person I haven't, I've tried to do everything right that I can. I've tried my best, but I'm still coming up short of what I'm supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And very thankful I had friends at the time I was talking about with that forced me out of that relationship. But when I left that relationship, my parents basically, she went and was at the doorstep of my parents crying, saying things like she didn't know how to pay an electricity bill when I'd done things ahead of time for her and written everything out for her. I'd done everything to try and make it as easy for her as possible. But my parents trusted her more than they trusted me.
Right.
And so for now there's kind of this, I don't know if I ever fully have full trust for them again. And I guess it's kind of this loss of my parents being this ideal figure.
Yeah. We have this idea that our parents know who we are and can see us, right? Like they can see more of us than this bit, right? And they've seen you your whole life. They've seen how you act. They know your virtues and your morality. And then there's this one thing, and it's this gay thing, right? And somehow that little string like unravels the whole bundle for them or something. I don't actually know.
You're not anything of what they grew up knowing.
It's like you're a totally different person now. And that was like the biggest thing that bothered me coming out to my parents. It was like this consciousness that something about their view on me had changed by learning this very not small attribute of who I am, but like ultimately like nothing to do with my core personality, nothing to do with my like morality had changed, nothing to do with my, virtues and the way I behave and how I treat others had changed. And yet like, because I like men instead of women,
they couldn't see anything else.
I was like a different human being, like a complete stranger to them.
I think I remember Mum saying something like, well, if you've lied to me about this the whole time, then is everything else that you showed about yourself not true either? Is this kind of like, from their perspective, it's this distrust of things rather than questioning what environment they gave me to be honest to them.
Wow.
But it's like, there's also this thing of understanding that your parents are all coming from their own stuff, right? Their own shit, and they don't have a perfect way of fixing this or approaching all these kind of issues, right? Like they. I mean, look, not all of them do the best that they can. Let's be honest, some of them don't. But like, I think it's been freeing me to realize that they're people too. Like,
absolutely,
they make huge, horrible mistakes that they don't always want to deal with the way that they do. But I think sometimes for a lot of us, it'd be nice just to have some acknowledgement.
Yeah.
Right? Some acknowledgement that they screwed up.
Yeah. I think we have a few examples already in this conversation of times when all we were asking for was for people to act according to their own standards, like their professed standards, right? And yet nothing, no action. You get slapped over the face, no action, I get bullied in a pretty extreme way, hardly any action whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like, I have long consequences from this, like bullying that happened to me, right? Like I can't use public urinals anymore because I'm always
it's too uncomfortable for you.
I'm thinking about if I'm going to get pushed into it, from behind. Like even today, I don't know how to get rid of that. I could probably go get therapy, but it's not important enough. But like I bring it up because it's like a physical manifestation of people doing nothing in my life to protect me according to their own virtues. And then here they are standing in judgment of people like you and me for like protecting ourselves, right? Because no one else protected us.
Yeah, I think there's this almost this need to focus immediately on how it affects them. I think that's the
Well,
core
everyone
of it.
naturally does this, right? We're doing it
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking out our feelings, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Like you really only have your own perspective. We guess at what other people's perspectives are. But yeah, I ultimately I feel like I've been very aggressive and pessimistic throughout this conversation. But like I am like you. I actually think most people were acting, they thought, out of love throughout this whole situation.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the people who were counseling you,
It's because they think that that's the best outcome, right?
they were doing it out of love for you, right? And then on the flip side, there were a whole bunch of things that they could have done and just didn't do. And I think about that a lot as a parent. Like, what are the things that I, as a parent, I'm not too worried about, you know, actively doing the wrong thing, but I am worried about like what were opportunities for me to actually do something
To be there for your kid. Yeah.
and really show them who I am, and I missed that opportunity, right?
Well, I think, like I guess, that reflection is your way of being able to, to do that the next time, right? It's not going to be. I think the good thing about these type of things is that it's not like you've failed once and you can't get that right the next time, right? Like there's going to be other opportunities for all of us to treat each other better, right?
A lifetime of opportunities, as it turns out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a lot about as well, like the theme of this season of the campfire has been around allyship and how can people be better allies. And a lot of it comes down to these like very minute actions that people can actively take to show who they are, right? Because like people don't know who you are.
People don't know how you think about them. Yeah.
You have to kind of signal it at a minimum somehow. And
Yeah, how do you show them it's a safe space rather than it just being this idea that they should know that it's safe.
And I guess I think a lot as well about like, as my kid gets through school, I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye out for the kids who might be on the outskirts, looking uncomfortable, looking like they might be being bullied, and not just standing by and
How
doing
you can
nothing
get
about
out
it.
in a room.
Is there
Yeah.
something I can do to make sure that someone's paying attention and
Well, even
protecting this kid?
Yeah, well, even if they just even if it's just making sure they feel like someone cares enough to find out, right? Like it might not even be that like there's something intervening that you can do in the situation, but it might be that at least they feel like they've got someone to go to, right?
Yeah. Yeah, someone to just say like, hey, like you didn't do anything wrong to deserve this.
Yeah, that you're okay.
You're just being you.
Yeah.
Keep being you. Like they're the ones who are doing something wrong. Don't lesser yourself to avoid being noticed and bullied. Like we need to fix this guy over here who's trying to stop you from doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something I haven't yet put to the test, but it is something I look forward to as my kids get older.
How old are your kids?
I have a 14-month-old.
Okay. Yeah.
So like we're
So
not
you're
there
way
yet.
around. Yeah.
But it is like, honestly, it was like a whole thing before we even had kids. Like I was thinking about all this trauma I had as a child, and I was like, God,
How do
I
I
don't know
not
if I
give
want to
them
bring.
that?
Well, it was like full stop. Do I have a kid? Like, is being a kid trauma?
right.
And like, are we all traumatized kids as adults? And I'm not that.
Not that
I'm
pessimistic.
not that pessimistic anymore. Obviously, I had a kid, but it took me a lot of like analysis and therapy, to be honest, to go back and say like, no, actually, there were a lot of opportunities for adults in my life to do something, and they didn't do the wrong thing. They just simply did nothing, and that was the wrong thing, right?
Yeah. No, I think sometimes it's this. Maybe for some people it's about paralysis of like what am I supposed to do? How do I even do anything? But I think the biggest people that have been helpful in my life have been the ones that have actually just like taken the effort to listen and ask questions and understand something. Right?
Yeah.
They don't have to fix it all for me, and they probably can't. Right? That's years of therapy to fix, but but it's just nice to know that someone cares enough to find out, right?
Yeah.
Or to to say enough to make an environment safe, right?
Yeah. I think a lot of it also comes down to when someone takes the time to point out something that's making them uncomfortable. You don't have to commit in the moment to like changing how you see the world or how you express yourself, but like commit to hearing what they have to say and listening to it.
Yeah.
So like a classic example I ran into a lot, and I'm thankfully not running into it as much as I used to, is colleagues using gay as like bad.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's
so
gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we hear it less and less, but like it's still around. You hear it occasionally. And I found that the best approach wasn't to be like, you can't say that. People would automatically just go like, whoa, yes, I can. First Amendment. And I'm like, we're in Australia.
You don't have any rights to free speech.
But no, like it'd be more like, hey, like why did you say gay? Like, you know, I'm gay, right? And like, that hurts my feelings when you use that word. And they're like, oh, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about somebody else. And I'm like, who are you talking about? Like, I'm a gay man. You just use the word gay.
You're just not even they're just not even conscious of it.
And then letting them go think about it, right?
Yeah.
And almost all the time that's happened where I've actually confronted somebody in that way, they've come back to me like maybe not a week later, maybe not 2 weeks later, but eventually they'd come back and be like, hey, I don't say that anymore. And I just wanted you to know, like, thank you for explaining why it matters to you.
Yeah.
And that it's not just you being like a language police, right? And
Yeah.
I think that applies to a lot of these types of situations where it's like people don't know what to do, or people are just told to do one thing and they don't know there's other options available, or they haven't thought about it.
Well, it's also just the environment they've been used to for a long time,
Exactly.
right? Like, and what you were saying has made me think of a situation back at an old job before Amazon, another company that I worked for, where I'd had a boss at the time who, he was wearing pink socks, right? And he commented about my pink shirt that I was wearing, right? And I basically said, "Oh, I like your socks." And he's like, "Oh, yeah, thanks. Didn't want it to look too gay." And it was kind of like, basically that immediate kind of jarring feeling of it. I didn't say anything at the time, but I had been like dealing with some like similar kind of affinity group stuff at this old company, and had used the situation in a talk that was happening, that a lot of kind of these leaders are at, not using his name, just like talking about a general person. And he came back to me going, I didn't understand how that affected you until it was said. So I think sometimes until someone tells them, how are they supposed to learn it, right?
Yeah. And even that, there's like two aspects to it, right? Like I think it's perfectly acceptable not to want to be perceived as something different to what you are.
Oh, yeah.
But it's all in the tone of voice. It's in how you express it.
Well, and knowing that the person you're talking to is gay, right?
We know what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, there's nuance there, but at the same time, how fantastic that they recognize that the delivery of that message was not, I don't want to be misperceived as a gay person. It was, gay is bad and I don't want to be that.
Yeah, that's the connotation that comes along with it, right? And I think often we assume people know, right? We assume they know our context and how it makes us feel. Sometimes they just need it in front of their face.
Yeah,
but
it's better to tell them early before you get all cooked up and blow up in their face too. That's something I'm always working on. Yeah. I look, we're running out of time, so I think we should wrap things up around there, if that's
cool.
All right with you.
Yeah,
any final thoughts before we head out?
No, nothing final for me. But yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great to chat.
It's been a fantastic conversation. I think I succeeded in not crying, but I was definitely feeling emotional at various points throughout that. So thank you for your candor and for being on the campfire with me.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Josh.
And I hope to everyone who's watching, like, you learned something today about what it's like to grow up as a gay man. And I want to invite all of you to think about the ways that you can intervene in other people's lives where maybe you've been a little bit too passive. And we'll see you next time.